If you love stories that open with mystery and end with revelation, this one delivers a perfect emotional escalation. It starts with a corroded rifle in a small town shop and expands into classified programs, buried family secrets, congressional testimony, and a long overdue reckoning for forgotten operators. Every beat is built for viewer retention, intrigue, danger, hidden files, living ghosts, and a final payoff that turns legend into record.
Hollis picked up the rifle with just 2 fingers, as though it were contaminated. Rust showered down onto his immaculate counter. The wooden stock was split completely in two. Its metal components were so rusted, they were almost unrecognizable. "Ma'am, this isn't a firearm, it's a piece of junk," he declared. "If you even attempt to shoot this, it will explode in your face." A few customers snickered. The old woman remained perfectly still. "You might want to check the serial number before you decide," she said quietly. Hollis let out a slight smirk. He had been a gunsmith since he was 16 and knew scrap when he saw it. Still, he decided to play along. He took a wire brush and began scraping at the receiver. As layers of corrosion came off, a set of numbers emerged. His sure, steady hands began to slow. He had never seen a prefix like it before. It was a mix of letters and numbers that finished with a dash and the letter X. He took out his phone to look it up. The database immediately blocked his query. The woman observed him with calm, unwavering eyes. "That number tells a tale," she whispered. "That's because the rifle was never meant to be made. A lot like me." Hollis finally looked at her, his arrogant confidence completely gone. Just who was this woman? It gets me thinking, where is everyone watching from today? Let me know your city in the comments below. If you love hearing about forgotten heroes that history leaves behind, make sure you subscribe. You will not regret it. Just a couple of hours after Hollis saw that number, 2 men in suits from the government walked into his store. After they heard what the old woman had to say, one of them stood straight and gave her a sharp salute. What kind of mystery did this old firearm hold? The sun crested the East Tennessee hills at 6:12 that morning. A wash of pink and gold, cut through the mist, settled in the valley. The lights inside Mercer and Sons Firearms had come on at 5:47. This was exactly 13 minutes before he was scheduled to flip the sign on the front door to open. Hollis moved about his shop with total self-assurance. At 26, his lean build came from a quick metabolism instead of workouts, and he carried himself like someone who was always right. The shop had its familiar morning smell. It was a blend of cleaning fluid, heavy gun oil, aged wood, metal cleaner, and the subtle chemical odor of bluing solution. He poured himself a mug from the coffee he had already brewed. He took it black, without sugar, and leaned against the main counter to look over the security footage from the night before on his tablet. The footage did not show anything unusual. It almost never did. His shop sat on a rural highway about 20 minutes outside of Knoxville, surrounded by farmland and forests. Theft was not a significant concern. Even so, checking the cameras was a critical step in his morning ritual. For 643 days in a row, he had performed the same sequence of tasks. Coffee was always first, followed by the security review, and then wiping down the display cases. The cases held a variety of handguns, organized by their era and maker. There were Colt 1911s, Browning high powers, and a nickel-plated Smith & Wesson Model 29 that had been there since before Hollis was born. He polished the glass in straight, precise strokes, avoiding circular motions. He worked from the left side to the right and from the highest point to the lowest. His father had insisted that circles left streaks. Hollis wasn't positive that was true, but he obeyed the rule anyway. He had on a classic gunsmith's apron made of brown leather, which was soft and worn along its edges. It had been his grandfather's, a man Hollis had never known. He passed away in 1994, just 3 years before Hollis's birth. The apron felt like his real legacy, a sign that this was his path. At 6:30, Hollis went to the rear of the store and walked toward a locked file cabinet. The cabinet was an army green color, clearly a piece of military surplus, and coated with a thin layer of permanent dust. A typed sticker on the drawer read Estate Archive pre-1980. He had inquired about it as a boy. His father explained it only held old sales receipts from his grandfather's time. Nothing of value. It was perpetually locked. Hollis ran his hand across the grimy top, then wiped his fingers clean on his apron. An old rotary phone was mounted to the wall over the back workbench. The off-white plastic had yellowed with age. Its coiled cord hung down like a lifeless vine. In all his time working in the shop, Hollis had never heard it make a sound. He assumed it wasn't even hooked up. It looked like garbage that should be thrown away, but his father had been firm about leaving it untouched, so there it remained. Tucked beside the credit card reader behind the counter was a small picture. It was a little 4x6-inch photograph. The scene was blurry. Its colors faded to a cloudy brown. The image captured a small group of soldiers posing by wooden boxes in a dense jungle. The squad had 7 men. You could not make out their faces, which were hidden by the bright sun or simply by the passage of time. Hollis had examined it numerous times, but the photograph kept its secrets guarded. He had no idea who any of the soldiers were. It was just one more thing his father had ordered him never to handle. At exactly 7 o'clock, his first customer arrived. It was Dale Pritchard, a regular, who was leaving his Remington 700 for its standard 6-week scope alignment. Dale was in his 60s, retired from an unclear profession, and had a gift for making conversation. Hollis secured the rifle in a vise, checked the barrel, and started adjusting the scope. Dale rested against the counter and drank the coffee Hollis gave him, a custom based more on routine than a deep friendship. "Heard a couple of guys were sniffing around about old military weapons," Dale commented. "Seemed like government fellas. They wore suits, but their footwear was not right for these country roads. That seems strange for this area." Hollis kept his focus on the scope. "Collectors come by asking things now and then," he answered. "Not these guys," Dale replied. "These men had the bearing of federal agents. You know the type. A little too formal, way too polite. They were curious about firearms from the 70s and 80s, and they were insistent on seeing original paperwork." For a brief moment, Hollis's hands stopped moving, the small tool suspended above the scope. He then continued his adjustments, making 2 minor turns counterclockwise. "It is likely just the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms on a routine inspection. That happens from time to time." Dale just shrugged. "Perhaps." But the entire encounter felt strange. Their talk soon moved on to different topics. At 7:42, Dale paid with cash and departed. Hollis walked back to his workbench and just stared into space for a full minute. He went over to the filing cabinet, studied it for a second, and then went back to the front of the shop. At 9:15, a young man and woman came in. They wanted to find a concealable handgun for the woman. Hollis presented 3 choices: a Glock 43, a Smith & Wesson Shield, and a SIG P365. He went over the key distinctions in magazine capacity, recoil, and how easily each could be concealed. The woman went with the Glock, a dependable and popular option. Hollis filled out the necessary background check forms and sold her the handgun, throwing in a box of 9mm rounds and a suggestion for a local gun range. At 10:30, Webb Calhoun walked in. Webb, at 71, was a serious collector of Civil War arms, with enough money to support his hobby. He spent his retirement traveling to gun shows and auctions, always searching for a unique item. He would visit Hollis's store a couple of times a week to discuss his latest acquisitions or what he was hunting for next. Hollis put up with his lengthy tales since Webb was a reliable source of business. Then, at 11:18, the little bell over the door chimed. Hollis glanced up from a Colt python he was wiping down to see an elderly woman step inside. She walked with a slow, deliberate pace, as if she were rationing her strength. She wore a rugged canvas coat, old jeans, and work boots caked with red clay. Her gray hair was pulled back into a no-nonsense ponytail. Her face showed the lines of many years, yet she carried herself with an undeniable strength. She had high, prominent cheekbones. Her gaze swept across the shop, assessing everything with a detached, expert eye. She held something swaddled in a faded olive-green wool blanket, the kind used by the army. Hollis barely acknowledged her, too busy listening to Webb's tale about an old Springfield rifle he saw down in Chattanooga. The woman approached the counter and waited without a word, holding her package tightly. Hollis continued to polish the python. "Is there something I can help you with?" he finally asked. She said nothing at first, simply placing her bundle on the glass with both hands. Her movements were slow and methodical. She set it down as if it were a sacred object or a ticking device. Then, with deliberate care, she began to unfold the fabric. The rifle slowly came into view. A heavy coat of corrosion coated the firearm from end to end. The metal was so tarnished it looked nearly black. The barrel was badly pitted and corroded. The wooden stock was ruined by a massive crack that ran its entire length. The split started at the butt of the stock and traveled all the way to the end. The wood was warped and swollen from exposure to moisture. The rifle on the counter looked as if it had been pulled from the bottom of a river. Hollis shifted a Python revolver to the side. He glanced from the gun to her, a patient, patronizing smile on his face. It was not a mean expression, just the kind of look you give someone who does not know any better. "Ma'am, thank you for coming in, but this piece is essentially worthless. To be frank, it is too unsafe to even hang on a wall. The stock is fractured, and the metal is deeply rusted. If somebody tried to shoot this, it would likely explode." From a nearby aisle, Webb let out a soft chuckle. Hollis picked up the rifle using just 2 fingers, keeping it far from himself, as if it were contaminated. The steel felt gritty in his grip. A fine dust of corrosion sprinkled onto the glass counter. "I can get rid of it for you," Hollis offered, "but there is no monetary value here, not 1 penny. The woman did not speak. She simply watched him with a strangely calm expression. Hollis set the rifle back down with a sharp crack. The sound echoed in the quiet shop. The other 2 customers stopped what they were doing to see what the commotion was. She spoke softly, a near whisper that seemed to clash with her tough appearance. "Before you throw that away, you might want to look at the serial number." Hollis actually laughed out loud. "Ma'am, trust me on this. I have been doing this since I was 16 years old. I know junk when I see it." She showed no reaction. Her face was a mask, and her gaze never left his. "The serial number," she said again, her tone insistent. "Just check it." A hush fell over the store. Webb froze in place. The 2 men browsing shotguns turned to watch the counter. With a long, tired sigh, Hollis grabbed a brass brush and some cleaning fluid. He wet a cloth. "Fine," he said. "Let us see what we have got here." He began to rub the spot on the firearm where the number should be. The brush scraped noisily on the rusted surface. Brown, sandy particles flaked off onto the countertop. Bit by bit, the solvent ate through the layers of filth. Digits started to appear from beneath the grime. Hollis rubbed harder, and the last of the digits appeared. His hands started to move more slowly. The serial number was strange. It did not have the right prefix. It was a combination of letters and numerals, not just numerals. The format was incorrect for any gun sold to the public. It ended with a hyphen and a letter. A hyphen and an X. Hollis froze. He stared at the marking G-X1847-X. He had never seen a serial number formatted that way before. Webb leaned closer to get a better view. "What is that?" Hollis did not reply. He took his phone out of his pocket and opened his valuation program. He typed in the code. After 3 seconds, the screen showed "No match found." He tried another search in a different database for military firearms. The result was only 2 words: "Access restricted." What on earth? Hollis put his phone down. Without a word, he walked into his back office. The room was tiny, about the size of a walk-in closet with a desk, its walls lined with bookshelves. He took a thick book from the second shelf. Its title read, United States Military Small Arms Serial Numbers, 1945 to 1985. The book's red cover was faded, and the corners were soft from years of use. He flipped to the section on serial markings. He scanned the text. A small paragraph at the bottom of page 347 drew his attention. Codes that finished with a -X, -Y, or -Z were designated for secret or experimental government projects. Their files were classified under National Security Directive 47B. Any attempt to get information required filing a Freedom of Information Act request with the Department of Defense. Hollis reread the section before walking back out to the main floor. The woman stood in the exact same position. Her hands were on the counter, and she observed him with a startling stillness. Hollis lifted the rifle again, this time with immense care. He saw it with fresh eyes, his quick dismissal replaced by professional curiosity. "Where did you get this?" His voice was entirely different now. "It was a gift," Webb snorted. "A gift?" "Ma'am, they did not let women serve in combat roles in those days." The woman slowly angled her head to face Webb. She remained completely silent. The silence in the store was louder than any sound. Hollis ignored everything but the rifle, finally seeing it for what it was. He took out a magnifying glass to inspect the barrel's threading. This was no factory-line weapon. It was a custom job, assembled with extraordinary skill. He checked the trigger mechanism. It was built with high-end parts, tuned for precision. His fingers traced the bolt, feeling for any abnormal wear. The patterns indicated it had been used with a silencer. He then looked at the stock. Under the chipped finish and water stains, he noticed faint marks. Someone had etched letters into the stock and then attempted to sand them away. They were almost invisible, but they were still there. Hollis pulled a set of calipers from a drawer. He measured the chamber and the rifling inside the barrel. "This was made for extreme distance," Hollis muttered. "A match-grade barrel for a special kind of round. This is not a regular issue rifle. It was for a specialist." His sentence hung in the air. The woman finished it for him. "It is a sniper's weapon. From Operation Brushfire, between 1973 and 1977, in Laos and Cambodia." The air in the shop went still. The other two customers were frozen in place. Webb's mouth was wide open. Hollis could only stare at her, dumbfounded. "Officially," the woman said, her tone flat and empty of feeling, "our country was never there." Hollis felt his own heart start to pound. Brushfire was a black op, fighting insurgents off the books. That whole operation is still classified. "A lot of it is," she corrected him, "and so are most of us. We are listed as dead in combat, or our files were completely erased." While she spoke, Hollis started to see things he missed before. He noticed her posture was perfectly balanced. Her shoulders were set. A car's exhaust popped outside, and her head snapped toward the sound. She assessed it, decided it was not a danger, and then relaxed. The words she used were out of place. Phrases like suppressed fire mission, adjusting for wind, and cold bore shot. It was the exact language of an expert, not some old woman in a gun shop. Webb finally managed to speak. "Who are you? You can call me Ennis." The phrasing was peculiar. "Not my name is, but a suggestion." "Ennis who?" Hollis asked. "Just Ennis." Hollis slid the rifle back over the counter to her. "Listen, I am not sure what is happening here, but I cannot get involved in some kind of classified government business. I cannot even give you a price for this." "I am not here for an appraisal," Ennis answered. "I need to know its value." A nervous laugh escaped Hollis. "Value? If this is real, it is one of maybe a dozen in existence. It could be worth 6 figures, perhaps a great deal more. A museum would give a fortune for this. Then you are going to sell it for me." Webb took a step closer. "Why come forward now? Why show it to anyone after so long?" For the first time, Ennis looked straight at him. Her eyes were a pale, almost transparent shade of gray, because for decades No one was searching for it. But now, someone is. When she finished, her right hand moved on its own, drifting up toward her left arm. Model. She made a fleeting gesture, touching her sleeve. The movement was over in a heartbeat. Hollis's phone buzzed on the counter. He looked down at the display. The message was from a number he had never seen before. It said, "Who ran a query on serial number G-X-1847-X at 11:34 this morning? State your identity at once." An icy feeling crawled up his back. He picked up his phone, read the message again, and then looked at Ennis. She was observing him, her face calm and completely unsurprised. He turned the phone so she could see the screen. She glanced at the text, but her expression did not change. "You should probably lock up for the rest of the day," she advised in a low voice. "And I would suggest you do not reply to that." Webb glanced from Hollis to Ennis and back again. "What is going on here?" Hollis was unable to speak. His eyes darted from the message to the rifle and then to the woman named Ennis. His hands started to shake. He flattened them on the counter to keep them still. The phone buzzed once more. It was the same unknown contact. "This is a national security issue. You are required to supply the contact details of the person who has firearm serial G-X-1847-X. Hollis let the phone fall to the counter like it was burning his hand. Across from him, Ennis was a statue. She had not moved or shown any emotion since entering his shop. The bell on the door tinkled softly. Hollis's eyes darted up. The only other customers in the store were heading for the exit. Fear and bewilderment were written all over their faces as they hurried out. His friend Webb stood frozen, his eyes fixed on Ennis as if he had seen a spirit. The air in the shop grew heavy and tight, the space closing in around them. Hollis reached for the rifle once more, his eyes finding the number etched in the steel, GX-1847X. It was a sequence that held immense power for certain influential people. He carefully placed the weapon down. "You had no intention of selling this rifle, did you?" he said, knowing the answer. "No," she confirmed. "So why did you bring it here?" A strange, slight smile touched her lips. "I needed an expert to confirm its authenticity. I needed someone to enter that number into a database. I needed an official check on that number to set off a silent alarm," Ennis clarified. "It was the only way to prove the rifle was real, and that I still exist." Hollis realized. "So you wanted them to come for you?" "No, I wanted witnesses," she replied firmly. "They will be here soon, and I need someone to tell the truth. Someone who can verify what happened in this shop today." The phone on the counter vibrated again. Hollis ignored it, but he could read the words on the screen. "Federal agents are en route. Remain in place. Do not handle any items. Await instructions." He looked over at Ennis. "They're coming." "I know," she said calmly. "How long do we have?" "Very little." Webb started to ease away from the counter. "I think it is time for me to leave." "No," Ennis said, her tone soft but absolute. "You need to stay put. You are a part of this now." Webb stopped moving immediately. Hollis felt a drumming in his own chest. "This is crazy. I am just a gunsmith who values old weapons. I have nothing to do with any of this. You joined this story the moment you cleaned the grime off that number," she stated. "You cannot walk away from this," she said. Just then, the sound of tires on the gravel drive signaled an arrival. Hollis glanced out the front window to see a black sport utility vehicle. It had dark windows and official government license plates. He whispered, "They have arrived." Ennis's gaze never left his face. She did not so much as blink. "When they start with the questions, just tell them exactly what happened, what you found. Nothing more." "And what about you?" he asked. "That depends on whether they are smart enough to understand." The vehicle's doors swung open and two men got out. They appeared to be in their middle 40s and well-built. Their casual clothes could not hide their profession. It was in the way they stood, the expensive watches they wore, and the way their eyes never stopped moving. They headed for the shop. Hollis felt like he could not breathe. his mind a complete mess. A single thought cut through the fog. How did this become my life? The door's bell rang gently as the men entered. They moved with a smooth, disciplined purpose, their eyes taking in every detail of the room with a detached coolness. The lead man offered a rehearsed, disarming smile. "Good afternoon," he began. "We are searching for someone who inquired about a particular serial number." Hollis tried to speak, but his mouth was too dry to form words. The second man's eyes landed on the rifle. A flicker of understanding crossed his face before it became a neutral mask. "That is an exceptionally unusual piece," he remarked. "Could you tell me where it came from?" Ennis gracefully moved from the wall where she had been standing. Her posture was poised, each motion deliberate. The agents glanced at her, saw an elderly woman in plain clothing, and dismissed her as irrelevant. They focused on Hollis again. "Sir, we require all documentation for this weapon, along with the identity of its owner." "You will not be touching a thing," Ennis stated. Her voice was low, yet it carried a sudden weight of command. It was the tone of a person who gives orders and expects them to be followed. The first agent barely looked at her. "Ma'am, this does not involve you. Please step outside. GX 1847X, Ennis announced with perfect clarity. "Put into service, October 1973. Decommissioned February 1977. I have been the keeper of that rifle for 49 years. If you need documentation, I have nearly 5 decades worth." The second agent's posture became rigid. He slowly angled his head, his full attention now on her. It was like he was truly seeing her for the first time. He studied the details of her face, her unwavering posture, and the powerful certainty she exuded. His entire demeanor changed. "What was your unit's designation?" he asked, his voice low. "Crosswind 7. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The agent's hand moved, an instinctual gesture that was almost a salute before he caught himself and let it fall. "My God," he breathed. "What do you believe is going to happen? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you love tales about heroes the world forgot, make sure you subscribe for more stories just like this one." For a full 30 seconds, the second agent did not move a muscle, his gaze fixed on Ennis. A heavy silence filled the shop until Webb finally spoke. "Will someone explain what is happening here?" The first agent looked as if he had seen a ghost. He fumbled for his cell phone. "Sir, we need to place a call immediately." The second agent remained frozen, his eyes locked on Ennis. "According to the official file, you are deceased. A training mishap in 1976. I have read that report myself." A small, sad smile touched Ennis's face. A report can be made to say anything. It is much simpler to shut down a project if everyone involved is officially dead. Hollis finally managed to speak. "What project? What are you talking about?" The agent pulled his gaze from Ennis and turned to Hollis. "Operation Brushfire. A secret sniper unit that ran missions in Laos and Cambodia near the end of the war. On paper, that program was never real. Its records were buried or destroyed by fire." "Not every record was destroyed," Ennis corrected. "Some of us were simply written out of existence." The first agent was talking urgently on his phone, having stepped toward the rear of the store. His voice, though low, was still audible. "Yes, sir. It is her. Crosswind 7 is alive. I have a visual confirmation, and she has the rifle. The number is a match. Yes, sir. She is right in front of me." Webb's jaw hung open as his gaze shifted from Ennis to the 2 federal agents. He struggled for words, finally managing a sentence. "Are you saying she was a government marksman?" The second agent ignored Webb completely. His focus was locked on Ennis, as though he feared she might vanish. "How is that possible?" "We saw the death certificate, the signed affidavits, the proof of burial." With methodical precision, Ennis rolled up her left sleeve. A long, jagged scar came into view, running from her wrist almost to her elbow. It was the mark of old combat surgery, the kind left by shrapnel. Though faded and smooth after decades, the evidence was clear. Shrapnel, Ennis stated plainly. Cambodian border, February 12th, 1977. We were being pulled out by helicopter, under enemy fire. We lost 2 members of our team that day. I neutralized 11 hostiles from 900 meters without a scope. She nodded toward the firearm. With this rifle, this very weapon, on that afternoon. The second agent's hands were trembling slightly. Your name is etched into the memorial wall at Langley, inside Building C. I have passed by your name more times than I can count. I would bet they still misspell it, Ennis replied, her voice flat and devoid of feeling. The first agent returned from his phone call. He looked utterly bewildered and frightened. Our instructions are to bring her in, to a classified location. She requires an immediate debriefing. Ennis let her sleeve drop, concealing the scar once more. No. The first agent appeared shocked. Pardon me? I did not spend the last 50 years living in the shadows only to be erased a second time, Ennis stated. Her voice was still low, but it now held an unbreakable strength. This rifle is authentic. Its serial number is in your records, and we have multiple witnesses here. If I disappear, people will start asking things. So here is what will happen. You two are going to leave through that door. I am going to keep my weapon. And after your superiors realize they cannot make me vanish twice, they will have to choose if this story becomes a quiet secret or a major news headline. The second agent glanced at his partner. A silent understanding passed between them, born from a long partnership. He turned back to Ennis. The agent's arm snapped up in a crisp, formal military salute. Ennis did not return it, offering a single, firm nod instead. The men headed for the exit, but one paused at the door. Ma'am, I just wanted to express my gratitude for your service, including the part they tried to make us forget. The door latched shut behind them, filling the room with a dense quiet. The air itself felt heavy. Webb finally let out a quivering breath. That really just took place. That entire thing was real. Hollis stood like a statue, his brain struggling to process what he had just witnessed. A woman officially deceased for nearly 50 years had been in his store, and 2 federal officers had just paid her their highest respect. Ennis moved to the counter and began to reassemble the rifle. She wrapped each part in the wool blanket with practiced, fluid motions. I was not being completely truthful with you earlier, she said, her eyes fixed on her work. I am not here to part with this. I only needed a professional to verify its identity. You have done that for me. But for what reason? Hollis's voice trembled. After so much time has passed, why reveal yourself now? Ennis paused her work, her posture becoming perfectly straight. When she finally answered, her voice carried a heavy weight of conviction. Because they are all dying, she said. The men who ran Operation Brushfire, from the generals down to the mission planners. They are all old now. They are carrying our history to their graves. Before the last of them passes on, I needed to know that someone else remembers that one of us is still here. Webb took a hesitant step forward. Did you really accomplish all those things you mentioned? Ennis clutched the wrapped rifle to her chest as if it were a sacred object. 9 confirmed kills, 11 probable. Each one of them was an enemy combatant. Every shot was taken to defend my team, the ones who did not get to come home. She gave the rifle a gentle pat through the cloth. That was my job. My unit never doubted me, and our adversaries knew without question that I was a soldier. She walked to the door, and the bell above it jingled as she opened it. Hollis called out on sheer impulse. Wait. Ennis stopped in the doorway without turning around. What is going to happen now? Ennis replied. That depends on how many people you can convince, and how loud you are willing to be. With those words, she was gone. The door swung closed, the bell giving one last, soft chime. Hollis and Webb stood staring at the empty air where she had been. A flash of light from the workbench drew Hollis's eye. He went over and discovered a single brass shell casing where the rifle parts had laid. She must have dropped it while packing. He picked it up and rolled it between his fingers. The head stamp read, 7.6, 2x50, 1mm NATO, 1974. This was concrete proof. It was tangible evidence of a conflict that, on paper, never happened. Webb came over to inspect the casing. So you are convinced by her account? Hollis placed the casing gently on the countertop. Yes, I believe every word. What is your next move? To be honest, I have no clue. Just then, his phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. You are not to speak about these events to anyone. This is an issue of national security. Any breach is punishable under federal law. Hollis held the phone out to Webb, who read it and let out a short, anxious laugh. So they were already using intimidation tactics. That part was clear. Hollis's eyes went from the shell casing to an old picture by the cash register, then to the locked file cabinet in the corner. That cabinet now seemed to hold countless secrets. I just have no idea, he repeated in a low voice. Webb had left 20 minutes earlier, saying he needed a very stiff drink, possibly the entire bottle. Hollis had locked up right after him, flipping the sign to closed at 1 p.m. Now, he was by himself in the stillness. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed steadily. The common smell of gun oil and wood polish filled the air, the same as always. The shop looked identical, but everything about it felt profoundly changed. He walked over to the filing cabinet and simply looked at it. The lock was not complex. His gunsmithing tools and skills would make short work of it. But he did not try. Instead, he went to the drawer underneath the register. He pulled out the extra key ring his grandfather always kept there. It held 7 keys. He knew most of them, keys for the front door, the safe, and the glass displays. But one of them was different. It was a small brass key, the kind made for a filing cabinet. Hollis walked back to the cabinet and tried the key. It fit perfectly, turning with a gentle click and unlocking the drawer. Inside were organized rows of manila folders, sorted by year, with labels written in neat script. They contained deployment schedules, equipment requisitions, and after-action reports. He chose a folder at random. It held a request for ammunition from April 1974 for special 7.62 NATO cartridges. The delivery point was Fire Base Hotel, but the location coordinates were redacted. A fuzzy signature was stamped with an unfamiliar government seal. He opened another folder. This was a mission summary from August 1975. It described a long-range elimination and a successful extraction. The agent was listed only as Crosswind 7. Hollis slid the folder back into place. He saw that his hands were trembling again. His grandfather did much more than just run a gun shop. This exact location had served as a supply hub for secret missions. His grandfather was involved in brush fire. With a sudden, cold clarity, Hollis took the photograph from behind the register and removed it from its frame. 7 soldiers were posed in a jungle setting, their features hidden by shadows. One figure was noticeably shorter than the rest. He recognized her posture. It was Annis, 49 years younger, pictured with her unit. He turned the photo over. A faded inscription on the back said, Crosswind Unit, April 1975, following the Firebase Hotel mission. Pray they all return. But not all of them did return. The weight of it all hit him, and he sank onto a stool, burying his face in his hands. His phone began to ring, a voice call this time, from a blocked number. He picked it up. A man's voice spoke. Mr. Hollis, my name is retired Colonel Marcus Reeves. I expect you had a guest today who left you with a number of questions. The voice was aged but steady, full of crisp military authority. I am not certain what I am permitted to say, Hollis answered. Just hear me out, Reeves insisted. That woman in your shop belonged to a ghost unit that protected this country in secret. They fought in places we officially never were, on missions that never happened. At the end of it all, they had 2 options. Disappear forever with new lives provided by us, or face public humiliation that would ruin them. Almost all of them chose to become ghosts. Reeves continued. She is back because we are all growing old. The handful of people who knew about their sacrifices are fading away. We are almost out of time. If their story is not told now, it will vanish with us. But why here? Why my store? Because your grandfather was the one who equipped Project Brushfire. The evidence of their existence is in your records. You have the years ahead of you to make sure their legacy is not forgotten. Hollis shut his eyes. So, what do you need from me? I need you to tell the truth, Reeves said. When the time comes, you will confirm what you know. You will state that the rifle is real, the serial number is valid, and the soldier who used it was a true patriot. But what if nobody believes me? Hollis asked. They will not have a choice. We are lobbying to get the official files opened. A partial release of the documents will be sufficient. Parts of Operation Brushfire are about to become public knowledge. Your testimony will be critical. You will be speaking for the history books. And if I say no, then true patriots will vanish from memory, Reeves replied. An unforgivable wrong. The phone clicked dead. Hollis remained seated in the quiet. The store he loved suddenly felt confining, like its walls were closing in. His gaze drifted to the shell casing, the old photo, and the cabinet his father always kept locked. His life was founded on hidden truths. This place was more than a store. His grandfather was more than a merchant. That antique phone was more than an ornament. It was all part of a well-kept secret. Or maybe it was a shield to protect the illusion of a simple life. Hollis rose and went over to the rotary phone, just looking at it. For 643 days, that phone had not made a sound. He now expected it to shriek to life at any moment. But the silence held. He returned to his work table and lifted the spent brass shell. It shone under the light. The digits stamped into its bottom were perfectly legible after 5 decades. It was government property. A living person had discharged this round. A soldier had chambered this round, estimated the range, held their breath, and squeezed the trigger. That soldier had watched through a scope as it traveled 900 meters to take a life. And that person was the unassuming old woman who was officially declared dead 49 years earlier. Hollis placed the casing on the table, took out his cell phone, and created a new entry. He typed, November 14th. A woman called Annis came in with a rifle. Serial number GX1847X. A prototype military sniper rifle. My system alerted the government. 2 officials arrived. They verified she was Crosswind 7, an agent from a secret operation called Brushfire. Her expertise and the scar from the shrapnel were proof enough. The officials even saluted her. Here was a living hero the world had left behind, and he was now part of her secret. He started to collect all the available proof. Just then the little bell above the door chimed. Hollis's heart leaped into his throat, his hand automatically reaching for the gun beneath the counter. An old man came in, using a cane for support, dressed in a vintage army coat with strange insignia. His gaze swept across the shop, landing on a photograph before finding Hollis. You have got to be the grandson, the man said with conviction. I am. Your grandfather looked after us when no one else would. And who are you, sir? The man took a step forward. You had a guest here a little while ago. A woman with a rifle. How could you possibly know that? The news came through about an hour back. Said Crosswind 7 was back in the open. I had to come see it with my own eyes. You really knew her? The old man gave a slow nod. We served together. It was February of 1977. I flew the helicopter that pulled her team out. We were under intense fire coming in. She gave us covering fire from a nearby cliff. I have never seen shooting like that. She dropped 11 enemy fighters in about 90 seconds. Every single shot hit its mark. He pointed toward the picture on the wall. That is me in that photo, 3rd from the left. Hollis peered at the picture and found him. The man in the image stood perfectly straight with military posture, even in the worn-out photograph. You were really there. 4 tours, the man confirmed. I was in places I am not allowed to mention, with people I was supposed to forget. But I never forgot her. Crosswind 7 was the finest soldier I ever saw. So why come here today? Her reappearance signals that something big is coming. It could be those old records are finally being opened. If their stories are coming out, you need to know some things. It concerns your grandfather and the true purpose of this shop. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a fragile, sealed envelope. Your grandfather gave this to me for safekeeping in 1978. He told me to pass it to the new owner of the shop after he was gone, or if the word brush fire was ever mentioned. He trusted that the right person would know what to do. The man offered the envelope to Hollis. The wax seal was unbroken. In his grandfather's script, it said, "For the one who continues the work." "What is inside?" Hollis asked. "The real story," the old soldier replied, "or as much of it as he could write down. You will find names, dates, and mission details, the proof that they were real. So why did you not open it? It was not my story to tell. Some secrets carry a heavy price. Your grandfather understood that. He recorded their history, but kept it secret to keep them safe." As he turned to go, the man stopped at the door. "Please tell her that I still remember," he asked. "Tell Crosswind 7 the Pelican 3 has not forgotten, and I am happy she survived." With that he departed, the bell announcing his leave. Hollis was left alone, holding the envelope. The old paper felt so delicate, as if it could disintegrate in his hands. He placed it on the counter and just looked at it. The quiet hum of the lights, the scent of gun oil, and the beam of sun from the window had not changed. Everything in the shop was the same, but his entire life had been completely upended. At last, Hollis took the envelope and carefully broke the aged wax seal. Inside were old photos, documents that looked official, and handwritten memos. He found a weapons log with delivery dates and locations, maps marked with coordinates, and mission briefs from an old typewriter. A letter from his grandfather was inside, addressed to no one in particular. It began, "If you are reading this, then the hidden past is finally being revealed to the right person. This is as it was meant to be. What we did was essential. The soldiers of Operation Brushfire protected this country. They worked in circumstances that would break an ordinary soul. They accepted missions that were one-way trips. When their duty was done, they were cast aside. The government issued them new identities and ordered them to erase their own pasts. But some deeds must be remembered. That kind of bravery needs to be recognized, even after 5 decades. This shop was their support system. I provided their weapons, their ammunition, and their custom gear. I knew a few of them and their missions, but I swore to keep it all a secret. Every single one of them was an undeniable hero. If their story is finally being told, ensure the whole truth is revealed. Do not allow any bureaucrat to rewrite what they accomplished." The envelope also held a small brass key for a lock that was not in the store. A tag on it said, "First National Bank of Knoxville, Safety Deposit Box 347. Additional proof is located here. Use it when the moment arrives." Hollis spread everything out, looking at the history displayed on his counter. He looked at photos of young soldiers in combat gear and documents marked top secret and for your eyes only. The names meant nothing to him, but he could feel their importance. His cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Anis. "I hear the pilot dropped by. Excellent. You are beginning to grasp the full situation. You will be prepared when the files are released. I appreciate you believing in me." Hollis replied, "Why am I part of this?" Her answer was immediate. "Because your grandfather left this duty to you, without you even knowing it. Because you sought answers instead of looking away. Because this story must be told, and I am done being invisible." Hollis sank into a chair, the full weight of it all hitting him. His day had begun normally. Coffee at 6 o'clock, a systems check, and cleaning the display cases. Now he held evidence of a hidden war and was communicating with a woman who was technically dead. And at that exact moment, the old rotary phone began to ring. Hollis shot up from his chair, his eyes fixed on the phone. What if you were the only one who could right a 50-year-old wrong? For Hollis, that question became real when a phone that had been silent for decades suddenly shrieked to life. The sharp, mechanical ring cut through the quiet of his shop. He lifted the heavy black receiver. Hello? An old, serious voice crackled to life on the other end. This phone has been dormant for 38 years. Its ring means an emergency plan is active. Are you the grandson? Yes, I am. Then listen. The brushfire documents are about to go public. They are released in 6 weeks, with a hearing in 8. We need a witness to prove the operation existed. Your grandfather set this up in case his soldiers ever needed a champion. Today, you are that champion. Who is this? Hollis asked. Someone who owes them a great debt, the voice said. Be ready. You will have to testify. Bring the papers. Bring the rifle data. Bring it all. Then the connection ended. Hollis carefully placed the handset back in its cradle. This is the story of a promise kept. If you believe forgotten heroes deserve a voice, you will want to see how this ends. He looked down and saw that his hand was trembling. A deep quiet fell over the shop again, a stillness so intense it felt as if the room itself was holding its breath. His gaze drifted to the counter, to the proof of a hidden past. 6 weeks until the public release, and 8 weeks until the hearing. That was all the time he had to tell the story of soldiers who had been ghosts for 5 decades. Hollis examined the photograph again. The unit stood by some shipping containers in a dense jungle. They were all so young, taking on a secret, perilous mission. Only one of them ever came back to continue the fight for their legacy. And now, that fight was his. A brass shell casing gleamed under the light. It was a small piece of metal carrying a huge responsibility, an artifact from a battle 50 years ago, whose impact was only now being felt. Hollis locked the display case, gathered the papers, and stored them in his safe. He knew his first stop in the morning had to be the bank. He needed to get the contents of box 347, sort through the evidence, and plan what to say. For now, he simply sat in the silent shop, feeling the immense weight of the past few hours. He put the old photograph back on the wall, this time inside a proper frame with a small nameplate. He arranged the shell casing in a velvet-lined box, placing a small printed card next to it. The card read, 7.6 to NATO, 1974, Operation Brushfire. A round fired to protect American soldiers. Recovered by Crosswind 7. This was hard evidence, the truth made real. The following 6 weeks were a whirlwind. Hollis spent every free minute in his back office studying the classified documents. The safety deposit box contained everything his grandfather's letter had promised. The box held mission briefings, deployment orders, and clear photographs of the operatives with their faces visible. Hollis finally saw the real people behind the code names. The agent called Crosswind 7 was actually a lieutenant named Sarah Ennis Carthage. She was just 23 years old when she began her service, and only 27 when she was wiped from all official records. The public found out on a Tuesday in January. The Department of Defense issued a very short, impersonal statement. It confirmed Operation Brushfire was a special program that ran from 1973 to 1977. Only a handful of files were released. A hearing was scheduled for February 15th to review the operation's history. Less than an hour after the announcement, Hollis's phone rang. It was Colonel Reeves. The colonel said the committee needed a witness to confirm the program was real. He told Hollis to prepare his testimony and bring every piece of proof. The colonel made it clear how crucial this was. Hollis told him he would be there. A few days later, a package with no return address arrived at the store. Inside, Hollis found a note from Ennis, written in a confident, neat script. "Thank you for believing in us," it said. "Just as I promised, the rifle is now at the Smithsonian. They are making an exhibit for it. A display called Operation Brushfire. Shadows in Service will open in March. You should come to the dedication. You have truly earned that right." With the note was a new photo. It showed the rifle in a glass museum case, cleaned and expertly lit. The placard read, GX-1847X, a covert operations sniper rifle, 1973 to 1977, carried by Lieutenant Sarah Ennis Carthage, Crosswind, 7. Her name was finally out in the world. Hollis hung the new photograph on the wall, right next to the old picture of her squad. 2 images, separated by a lifetime. A woman who lived in absolute secrecy was at last emerging from the shadows. The entire feel of the shop changed after that. Customers bought the same things, but Hollis now realized that some objects hold histories far deeper than they appear. Hollis learned to ask smarter questions and listen carefully to the answers. He gathered every detail before making up his mind. Webb visited twice a week but never spoke of that day in November. He would only glance at the pictures on the wall, look at the displayed shell casing, and give Hollis an approving nod. The morning of February 15th was bright and cold. Hollis had come to Washington the day before, staying in a hotel near Capitol Hill, but he did not sleep. He went over his testimony again and again in his head. He felt the burden of uncovering a secret buried for 50 years. The hearing room was smaller than he imagined. It had wood walls, seats for guests, and a long table for 5 members of Congress. News cameras were positioned on each side. The room held about 40 people. Hollis got there early, picked a seat in the back, and watched as people arrived. He recognized some faces from the photos. They were old now, in their 80s. Some used wheelchairs, others leaned on canes. Each person wore a piece of their past, like a jacket with old unit patches or a hat with a faded insignia. You could see the pride on their faces, but also the weight of so many years of silence. At 9:15, Ennis walked into the room. She wore a simple dark suit, and her hair was pulled back. She moved with that same quiet confidence, Hollis recalled. But she seemed different now. She appeared to stand taller, with a new kind of self-respect, like a terrible weight had been lifted. She sat in the front row, looking at no one and acknowledging no one. She just sat there with her hands folded in her lap. The hearing started at 9:30. The committee chair, a woman in her 60s, made the opening statement. She talked about the difficult topic, the decades of secrecy, and the great sacrifices of agents who got no recognition. She then called the first witness, an 82-year-old retired general. An aide helped him to the stand. He testified that Operation Brushfire was a critical strategic program. He described the lives it saved, the secrets it uncovered, and the missions it achieved. He spoke for 20 minutes, his voice surprisingly strong. When he was done, he looked right at Ennis and gave her one slow, respectful nod. The second person to testify was the pilot called Pelican 3, the man who had been to Hollis's shop. He told of rescue missions and of agents who did their jobs in ways that broke every official rule. He spoke of their calm while under fire, and a single mission in February of 1977. He said his team only survived because one agent provided covering fire. He did not say Ennis's name, but he did not have to. Everyone in the room knew exactly who he meant. Hollis was the third witness called. He walked to the table, set down his folder of proof, was sworn in, and sat down. The chairperson asked for his name and how he was connected to Operation Brushfire. "I am Hollis Mercer. I own a gun shop in Tennessee. My grandfather ran it during the years of Operation Brushfire. This last November, a woman brought a rifle to my shop to be valued. The serial number was GX1847X. I checked the number and learned the rifle was classified government property. The woman then told me she was the agent who was first issued that rifle. A few hours after that, federal agents came to confirm her story. Later, I discovered papers in my grandfather's files that proved his shop was a secret supply station for brushfire." The chairperson asked if Hollis had brought any of that evidence. Hollis opened his folder and took out a brass shell casing from its case. "This was left in my shop by the agent. It is a 1974 7.62 NATO round, fired on a mission my grandfather wrote about in his journals. He placed it on the table, then showed the photographs. The Crosswind team from 1975 forms for new weapons and typed mission reports. He showed them everything. This evidence proves Operation Brushfire was real. It proves these people served, they won, and they deserve to be honored. The committee members examined the evidence, passing the items to one another. They asked if it was real, who kept it for so long, and how Hollis knew it was authentic. My grandfather was careful with details, Hollis said. He knew that someday the truth would need a defender. He believed these people deserved justice. The chairperson nodded. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. This evidence will be officially added to the record. Hollis went back to his seat, his hands trembling with nervousness and relief. The chairperson then called the last witness, Lieutenant Sarah Ennis Carthage, also known as Crosswind 7. The room became completely silent. Ennis stood, walked to the witness stand with her usual calm stride, sat, and took the oath. Her voice was steady. The chairperson spoke kindly. Lieutenant Carthage, we thank you for agreeing to be here. We know this is difficult, considering your service was erased from the official records. For the record, please state your name and your service code. My name is Sarah Ennis Carthage. I was Crosswind 7 in Operation Brushfire from October of 1973 to February of 1977. I was a sniper, and I finished 42 missions. I had 9 confirmed kills and 11 probable kills. All of them were enemy fighters. Every single time, it was to protect American soldiers. The chairperson continued. This committee has looked at secret mission files that mention your codename. However, according to official military records, you died in a training accident in 1976. Can you explain this inconsistency? Ennis's expression was impossible to read. When Operation Brushfire was shut down, its agents were given 2 choices. We could face a congressional hearing and expose sensitive methods that were still in use, or we could accept a new identity and simply disappear. I chose to disappear. My fabricated death was the tool they used to make it happen. And what made you decide to come forward now? Because the men who offered us that choice are old and no longer in power. Because our families deserve to know the truth about our lives. And because I am done being a ghost. Her voice broke on that last word, the first hint of emotion Hollis had ever heard from her. The committee members conferred quietly. The chairperson spoke to her one last time. Lieutenant Carthage, this committee acknowledges your service and its personal toll. We recognize the impossible choice you faced and the profound injustice of having your history erased. It is our official recommendation that you and every Brushfire operative receive the Intelligence Star for Valor in covert service. The room fell into a sudden, deep silence. An elderly man in the front row got to his feet, his hand snapping into a sharp, well-practiced salute. Then another stood, and another. In a matter of seconds, every veteran in the room was standing, honoring the woman whose story had been buried for half a century. Ennis did not stand or return the salute. Instead, her eyes scanned the faces of her old comrades, a silent acknowledgement of their shared history. The chairman and the committee members then rose. They did not salute, but their posture conveyed deep respect. The quiet lasted for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Ennis got to her feet. She gave one firm nod to the room, then turned and walked out, bringing the hearing to its end. Hollis sat frozen in his chair, completely stunned. He watched as the veterans lowered their arms, sat down, and quietly wiped their eyes. Webb, sitting just ahead, looked back and met Hollis's gaze with an understanding nod. An entire history was exchanged in that one silent look. Hollis saw Ennis standing alone in the hallway, looking at the city through a large window. Her hands were held behind her back in a formal military way. "What you did in there was very brave," Hollis said. "It should have happened long ago," she answered, her gaze still on the view. "So, what happens now?" he asked. "A ceremony at Arlington," she told him. It is scheduled for next month. Our names will be added to the Brushfire Monument. There are 17 of us still living, and we will all be there. And after that, she finally turned to look at him, a small, genuine smile on her face. Then I am done hiding. I might write a book, or maybe just live a normal life, knowing the truth is finally known, but I will never be erased again. Hollis held out his hand. Thank you for putting your trust in me. She shook it firmly. And thank you for believing me when it would have been simpler not to. She then walked toward the elevators where the other veterans were waiting. The pilot welcomed her with a warm embrace, and she was soon surrounded by her friends, all of them sharing stories and thanks. The very next day, Hollis was back in Tennessee. His shop looked the same on the outside, but inside it felt entirely new, as if it now had a more important purpose. He spent the following week reorganizing the whole space. He moved the filing cabinet behind his counter and decided to leave it unlocked. He put a new label on the front that said, Historical Archive, Operation Brushfire. Now customers could see it, ask about it, and hear the story. The old rotary phone on the wall remained quiet. But for Hollis, it was more than an object. It was a reminder that some connections last forever, and that some truths take decades to be revealed. He added more pictures to his wall. Next to the original Crosswind team photo, he hung new images. Ennis at the hearing, the rifle in its museum case, and a picture from Arlington of 17 veterans standing together again. He put up one last photograph, taken at the museum dedication in March. The photo showed Ennis standing by the glass case that held the rifle. Her hand rested on the glass. Her eyes were fixed on the weapon that had defined 4 years of her service, and the 49 years of silence that came after. In the picture, she was smiling. About 3 months later, a woman who looked to be in her early 20s entered his shop. She seemed nervous, clutching a worn duffel bag. My grandmother passed away last month, she started. She told me if I ever had money problems, I should bring this to someone who would understand its real value. She gave me this address. From her bag, she pulled an old M1911 pistol. The finish was faded. The grip was worn smooth, and the serial number was barely visible. Hollis could see the worry on her face, the fear that he would send her away. He reached for a brass brush. Let's take a look at what you have. She watched as he carefully cleaned the markings. Was your grandfather in this business too? She asked. He was, Hollis said, and he taught me that true worth is rarely on the surface. It is often hidden by time, rust, and being forgotten. Have you ever seen a hero get forgotten, their story completely erased by time? It is a terrible injustice, but sometimes a quiet, ordinary person can help make things right. This is a story about how hidden truths find their way into the light, and it starts with a rusty old firearm. In my shop, a young woman looked nervous as I inspected the pistol. I told her you have to look past the surface to find what is important. Slowly, the serial number appeared, showing it was made in 1943. This gun was not rare, but its history was everything. A soldier carried this, I explained. Their life depended on it. That gives it a value that money can't measure. The worry on her face softened. To a collector, it might be worth $800. But to your family, it is a priceless piece of your history. Tears welled in her eyes as she thanked me. If you believe some stories must be told, stick around. And tell us in the comments about a time you saw justice finally served. After she left, the shop felt different. It was finally the sanctuary my grandfather dreamed it would be. This was a place where lost histories were rediscovered and where character mattered more than cash. At 5:47, I started closing up for the night. The routine was the same, but my reason for doing it felt new. I polished the glass counters with a deep sense of respect, reviewed the security cameras, and logged the day's activities. Before locking the door, I paused by the wall of photographs. My gaze fell on Enos at the museum, on the Crosswind team, and on the ceremony at Arlington. 17 heroes, their stories once buried, were finally being seen. These secret soldiers were at last receiving the honor they had earned. I picked up a brass shell casing, feeling its weight in my hand. It was a 7.62 NATO round from 1974, fired 5 decades ago. This tiny object, saved and brought home, was the final piece of evidence that some truths refused to be forgotten. I set it back on its display, switched off the lights, and secured the front door. Night fell over Tennessee, with a quiet, star-filled sky. The highway noise became a gentle hum as I sat in my truck, looking at the dark shape of my shop. The old sign, Mercer and Sons Firearms, had watched over this spot for a long time. It had been run by 3 generations, growing from a simple supply post to a business, and now it felt more like a memorial. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Enos that said, "I saw your name at the museum exhibit. We are getting 20,000 visitors a month. People need to hear these stories. We could not have done it without you." I wrote back, "The honor was all mine. Thank you for trusting me with their history." I put the truck into drive, my thoughts on old guns, classified papers, and the immense weight of a 50-year secret. And I thought about the bravery it took to finally share that story with the world. The next morning, I unlocked the shop at 5:47. My daily tasks had not changed, but my entire perspective had. This was no longer just my work. It was my purpose, a profound link to a history much bigger than me. At 9 o'clock, a man walked in with a battered rifle, asking for an appraisal. It looked like it was worth almost nothing, but I greeted him with real warmth. I handled the old firearm with care, examining every single mark while I listened to his story. I had learned that true value is often hidden deep inside. Overlooked things can hold the most incredible histories, and every single one of those stories deserves a voice. The sun caught a brass casing on my desk, its glint a small reminder that the truth, much like a bullet, can take 50 years to hit its target. The pictures on the wall were now a bridge, connecting the past to our present. A long-held secret was now public knowledge, and a hero was no longer nameless. The world finally knew that the operative known as Crosswind 7 was a woman named Sarah Enos Carthage. Her incredible story would never be forgotten again. Standing there, I looked at the worn rifle and the man waiting hopefully. I realized this very room had taught me how to see the real meaning hidden beneath the surface. I gave the appraisal with quiet respect, knowing that broken things can be mended, and things that appear worthless can be the most valuable of all. Sunlight streamed through the glass, filled with the scent of gun oil and old wood. I imagined an elderly woman setting that rusty pistol on my counter, a simple act that set everything in motion. Their stories must be shared, their sacrifices must be remembered, and the truth will always, always find a way.